The white fox had no reason to be there. That was the first thing Astrid noticed. The wrongness of it. The way the creature sat in the middle of the frozen path as if it had been waiting for her, specifically as if the entire vast and indifferent Alaska wilderness had conspired to place it exactly there, in exactly that moment when she had nowhere left to go and no one left to turn to. She stopped walking. The wind howled across the valley below, carrying ice crystals that bit at her exposed cheeks, and the fox simply looked at her with eyes the color of pale winter sky. Calm, ancient, utterly unafraid. Astrid had lived on the northern frontier her entire life. 24 years in the brutal cold of the Rocky Mountain interior, where temperatures dropped to 25 below, and stayed there for months. She knew every animal that roamed these territories, every track in the snow, every call that echoed between the frozen peaks at night. She had studied them with the methodical attention of someone whose survival depended on understanding the difference between a wolf's print and a wolverine's, between the cry of a lynx and the scream of wind through narrow passes. She had never seen a white Arctic fox. Not once. The elders said they were gone. Extinct. A story told to children about a time when the world was different and the blood of the North ran stronger and purer through the veins of those who guarded it. A fairy tale wrapped around a kernel of truth that no one quite remembered anymore. She took one step forward. The fox did not run. "You should not be here," she said aloud, her breath a cloud of white vapor that dissolved instantly into the bitter air. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, too loud against the profound silence of the valley, the kind of silence that only existed in places where human voices were rare and the land had learned to live without them. The fox tilted its head. There was something in that small motion that made the back of her neck prickle. Something that felt less like an animal reacting to sound and more like a person acknowledging a statement they found interesting. Considering it, weighing it against some internal knowledge that Astrid could not access. She shook the thought away. She was tired. She had been awake since before dawn, making the long trek to the ridge caves where the frost root herbs grew in the deep crevices where snow never quite reached. The cold had a way of making the mind produce images and meanings where there were none. She had learned this over 6 years of walking these paths alone, harvesting the plants that kept Frost Ridge settlements' meager medical supplies functional through the brutal winters. She took another step intending to walk around the creature and continue down the path toward home. The fox moved, not away, alongside her, 3 steps to her left, matching her pace exactly. Its white fur was almost invisible against the snow, except for those pale blue eyes that kept returning to her face with an expression she had no word for. Astrid stopped again. "Go away," she said. It was not unkind. She had never been unkind to animals. She had spent most of her life preferring their company to that of the pack members who looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt that she had learned to ignore but never quite learned not to feel. The fox sat down in the snow and looked at her. She stared back at it for a long moment, her leather pack heavy on her shoulders, the frost root inside wrapped carefully in cloth to prevent bruising. The wind picked up, sending a spray of powder across the path, and still the fox sat there waiting for something she did not understand. "Fine," she said finally. "Follow if you want. I cannot stop you." She resumed walking. The fox walked with her, all the way down the ridge, all the way across the frozen valley floor, where the wind was worst and the ice cracked under her boots in ways that always made her stomach drop, even though she had crossed it hundreds of times and knew exactly which routes were safe and which ones led to the deep places where the lake never quite froze solid. All the way to the outer fence of Frost Ridge settlement, where wooden posts marked the boundary between the pack's claimed territory and the wildlands beyond. The fox stopped at the boundary markers. It sat down at the edge at the exact point where Astrid knew the old wards had been laid generations ago. Wards that were supposed to keep dangerous animals out during the winter months, when hunger made even the wariest creatures bold. Wards that had been maintained by the settlement's elders for as long as anyone could remember, reinforced every autumn with rituals that Astrid had never been allowed to attend because she was Omega, and Omegas did not participate in pack magic. The fox sat there as if it understood the line it was not meant to cross. Astrid looked back at it once before she pushed through the gate. The creature watched her go with those pale eyes, and she did not understand why that felt like something important. She did not understand why her chest felt tight or why her hands were shaking slightly as she secured the gate behind her. She did not understand any of it, and that lack of understanding sat in her stomach like a stone all the way back to the healing house at the far edge of the settlement. She understood even less when the fox was there again the next morning. The settlement was already in motion when Astrid opened the door of the healing house at dawn. Not the usual slow awakening of a frontier community preparing for another day of survival, but the particular quality of noise that happened when something significant had occurred and everyone was simultaneously trying to find out more information and pretend they already knew. She heard it before she saw it. The raised voices and the sound of boots on frozen ground moving with urgency. The scrape of hastily assembled market stalls being moved aside. The bark of orders being given and only partially followed. She paused at the entrance to the main square, her medical kit slung over one shoulder, and grabbed the arm of Petra, the baker's daughter, who was hurrying past with wide eyes and a loaf of bread pressed against her chest like a shield. "What is happening?" Astrid asked. Petra looked at her with an expression that managed to combine excitement and a very specific kind of social pleasure that people took in delivering important news to those who had not yet heard it. "The Alpha King is coming," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Kaelum Ironveil himself. He sent advance riders this morning. He will be here before midday." The words landed in Astrid's chest with a weight that surprised her. She released Petra's arm and let the girl rush off standing still, while the settlement moved around her in waves of preparation and anxiety. People she had known her entire life hurried past without acknowledging her, too focused on their own concerns to notice the Omega healer standing at the edge of the square. The Alpha King, she had never seen him. Few people in the frontier settlements had. He ruled from Iron Keep deep in the Alaska interior, where only those with the strongest lichen blood could survive the winters that lasted 9 months and killed anything weak or unprepared. He governed the 7-pack territories that stretched from the Pacific coast to the Canadian border, with a combination of military precision and political intelligence that had maintained an uneasy peace for longer than most people could remember. She knew his name. Everyone knew his name. Kaelum Ironveil, the Iron King. The one who had ended the border wars before Astrid was born and who had not, in all the years since, given anyone sufficient reason to start them again. He was by all accounts a man who did not make mistakes. She had always imagined such a person as something more concept than flesh, more symbol than human. The idea that he would arrive in her settlement in this forgotten outpost at the edge of everything before midday today made the world feel suddenly and uncomfortably small. She had work to do. She went to do it. The healing house was at the far edge of the settlement, which suited everyone involved. Pack members came to Astrid when they needed her and avoided her when they did not, which was the arrangement she had accepted long ago as the closest thing to normal to her life was likely to offer. She had no wolf. That was the fundamental fact around which everything else in her life organized itself. Every member of a lichen pack was meant to carry a wolf within them, the inner animal that was their birthright and their bond to the pack hierarchy, the thing that determined their rank and their place and their worth in the eyes of everyone around them. Astrid had turned 18 and felt nothing. No awakening, no shift, no silver eyes in the mirror or heat beneath her skin on a full moon. Nothing. Just the same awareness she had always had, the same body she had always inhabited, and the growing realization that something fundamental was missing from her that everyone else possessed. The pack healer at the time had examined her and delivered the verdict with the efficient kindness of someone communicating a diagnosis that was not a surprise. Omega status. No wolf manifest. She would serve the pack in whatever capacity her other skills allowed. Astrid had gone back to her small room in the healing house and sat with the information for 3 days before she decided that it was simply the shape of her life and she would live it anyway. That had been 6 years ago. She was good at her work, better than good. She knew more about medicinal herbs and wound treatment and fever management than anyone else in the settlement, possibly more than anyone in the 3 nearest territories. She had read every text the settlement library possessed on the subject, worn the pages thin with repeated study. She had written to healers in other regions for information they did not have, carefully copying out letters in her precise handwriting and waiting months for replies that sometimes came and sometimes did not. She had counted and cataloged 47 different herb types that grew within a day's walk of the settlement. She knew which ones reduced fever, which ones slowed bleeding, which ones could be combined to create pain management compounds that worked better than any single plant alone. She had developed a 3-layer suture technique for deep wounds that left minimal scarring and reduced infection rates by more than half compared to the old methods. When people were sick or injured, they came to her and she helped them. And for the duration of those interactions, she was not the Omega without a wolf. She was simply the person who knew what to do. She had built something out of the material she had been given. She had decided very deliberately and at considerable personal cost to be proud of it. Most days she succeeded. She was checking her supplies when the commotion outside grew louder. The particular change in noise that meant something anticipated had finally become real. She heard horses, many of them, the jingle of tack and the low murmur of voices speaking with the clipped efficiency of people who traveled with purpose. She told herself she was not going to go look. She stayed at her preparation table for another 4 minutes, measuring dried frost root into small cloth packets with careful attention, each one precisely the same weight as the last. And then she put down the packets and walked to the door and looked. He was not what she had expected. She was not sure what she had expected, something more overtly ceremonial perhaps, more clearly constructed for the purpose of inspiring awe. What rode into the settlement square was a man on a dark horse flanked by a guard of 12, but not hidden by them. Dressed in practical riding clothes of heavy charcoal wool and dark leather, rather than anything that announced rank through ornamentation. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered. He had the particular quality of stillness that very physically powerful people sometimes possessed, as if their bodies had learned early that they did not need to perform strength because the fact of it was already obvious to everyone in the vicinity. His hair was dark, close-cropped at the sides, slightly longer on top. His face was the kind of face that genetics had arranged into something striking without apparently making any effort about it. All strong lines and a jaw that looked like it had been designed specifically to communicate that its owner was not a person who entertained frivolous arguments. He dismounted in a single fluid motion and spoke to Elder Marcus without any preamble that she could observe from this distance. Marcus nodded with the expression of a man who was trying very hard to appear as though receiving the Alpha King was a perfectly ordinary occurrence. Astrid went back inside. She stayed there for the rest of the morning, treating the few patients who came to her. Old Thomas with his recurring joint pain that flared in cold weather. Young Sarah with a cough that had not yet become serious but needed monitoring. She prepared medicines, reorganized supplies, did every task she could identify that needed doing. The settlement hummed around the king's presence like a body around a foreign object, reorganizing itself in subtle ways to accommodate the new center of gravity. She did not join the gathering that she knew was happening in the main hall. She had not been invited, and even if she had been, her absence from settlement, social occasions was established enough that no one would notice or remark on it. She was the healer. She was useful. She stayed in her useful place and did not think about the rider on the dark horse and the strange quality of his stillness. She succeeded at this for almost exactly 2 hours. Then Elder Marcus knocked on her door. "The king requests the settlement's healer," he said when she opened it. His expression was carefully neutral in the way that meant he had opinions about this development that he had decided it would not be politically wise to share. One of his guards sustained an injury on the road. Nothing serious, I am told, but he wants it properly treated. Of course, Astrid said. She got her kit. The main hall had been rearranged since that morning. The long communal tables pushed to the sides to create a more formal space. The settlement's best lanterns lit despite the fact that it was still hours before true darkness. The king's party occupied one end of the hall with the efficient economy of people accustomed to making any space function as temporary headquarters. Astrid noticed the woman before she noticed anyone else. She was extraordinary in the way that a weapon is extraordinary, beautiful and deliberate, communicating purpose through every detail of construction. She stood at the king's left hand in a gown of deep blue that had no business being this far north in this season. Her dark hair was arranged with the architectural precision. Her expression was a masterwork of composed attention that managed to be simultaneously welcoming and evaluating. She was, Astrid knew from the few pieces of information that reached even frontier settlements, Lady Sarah Ashford, daughter of Lord Draven Ashford of the Eastern Territory, the king's primary political advisor. She was also, according to the same sources, widely expected to become his queen before the year's end. Looking at her, Astrid could not find a single reason why this would not be exactly what happened. The injured guard was easy to find. He sat on a bench near the far wall with his right hand wrapped in a cloth that was doing an inadequate job of managing what appeared as she got closer to be a significant laceration across his palm and the base of 2 fingers. She crossed the hall with her kit, aware of being looked at without allowing that awareness to change her pace or expression, and crouched in front of the guard. "I am the settlement healer," she said. "May I see your hand?" He unwrapped the cloth and she examined the injury with the focused attention that made everything else temporarily irrelevant. It was deep but clean, no tendon involvement that she could see. She would need to suture it properly. 3 layers. The muscle layer first to provide support, then the subcutaneous tissue to reduce tension on the skin, Then the external closure was small, precise stitches that would minimize scarring. She began organizing her kit with practiced efficiency, asking the guard brief questions about sensation and movement in his fingers. His answers were stoic and brief, which suited her. She threaded her needle, cleaned the wound with alcohol that made him hiss through his teeth, and began the first layer of sutures. For several minutes, there was only the work, the guard's stoic answers, the small particular sounds of medical treatment, the scratch of thread through tissue, the quiet focus that was the closest thing Astrid had to meditation. "You are very calm," said a voice above her. She looked up. The king was standing 3 feet away, watching her work with an expression she could not immediately categorize. Up close, he was even more simply and uncomplicatedly present than he had seemed across the square. The kind of person whose physical reality left no room for the mental image you had constructed in advance. His eyes were gray, a very specific shade of gray that made her think involuntarily of frozen lakes just before the spring thaw, when the ice was still solid, but you could see the dark water moving beneath it. "Most people become less precise when they are being observed," he said. His voice was quiet, lower than she expected. It held a particular quality that she recognized after a moment as genuine curiosity rather than any kind of test. "You became more precise." "Well, I became more precise because there is a person in pain who needs this wound properly closed," she said, because it was true, and then realized a half-second later that she had just spoken to the Alpha King of the North in the tone she used to explain basic medical logic to people who were making her work harder than it needed to be. She felt the guard tense slightly under her hands. She finished the suture she was on with steady fingers, then paused and looked up at the king. "I am sorry," she said. "That was direct to the point of rudeness." "It was direct to the point of honesty," the king said. "I find I prefer it." He was still watching her. She was aware of it the way you were aware of a fire in a cold room. Not uncomfortably, but in a way that was impossible to ignore. "What is your name?" he asked. "Astrid," she said. "Astrid Wintermere." A pause, she added, because it would come out eventually if it had not already. "Omega status. No wolf manifest. I serve the settlement as its healer." Something moved in his gray eyes that she could not read. Not pity, not the contempt she had learned to expect. Something else entirely. "Astrid Wintermere," he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "You share a name with the winter itself." "It is the name I was given," she said. "It means what it means." She tied off the suture and began wrapping the guard's hand with clean binding cloth. Her movements were efficient, economical. Each wrap precisely placed to provide support without restricting movement. "Your man will need to keep this dry and change the dressing daily," she said, addressing the guard but speaking loud enough for the king to hear. "I will leave supplies and instructions. The stitches should come out in 10 days if there is no sign of infection. He should have full use of the hand within 3 weeks." She looked up at the guard. "Do you have any questions?" He shook his head, looking slightly dazed in a way that she suspected had less to do with the injury and more to do with the fact that she had just spoken to the Alpha King with the brisk efficiency of someone conducting a routine medical consultation. She packed her kit, she stood. She looked at Kaelum Ironveil and found him still watching her with that expression she could not name. "If there is nothing else required," she said, "I will return to the healing house." "There is one thing," he said. He tilted his head slightly, and the motion was so unexpectedly reminiscent of something that it took her a full 2 seconds to identify it. It was the same motion the fox had made yesterday on the path, when she had said it should not be there. The exact same angle, the exact same quality of attention. "I was told," the king said, his voice very quiet now, very controlled, "that a white Arctic fox has been seen following you across the valley." The hall was not particularly loud, but it became more quiet. She noticed Lady Sarah's attention sharpen from across the room, becoming something more focused and less decorative. She noticed the way several of the king's guards had turned to look at her. She noticed the way Elder Marcus standing near the door had gone very still. "One fox," she said carefully. "I encountered it on the ridge path yesterday. It followed me to the settlement boundary." She paused. "And this morning," she continued, keeping her voice level, "it was there again when I left at dawn. It followed me to the boundary again." Another pause. She met the king's gray eyes directly. "I do not know why. I have no explanation for it." "No," the king said softly, "neither do I." He held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary for any conversational purpose she could identify. "Yet," he added. Then he inclined his head slightly, a gesture that might have been dismissal or acknowledgement, or something else entirely. "Thank you for treating my man healer." She left the hall. She walked back to the healing house through the cold afternoon air and stood inside it for a long time without lighting the lamp, listening to her own heartbeat, which was doing something unusual that she attributed to the unaccustomed strangeness of the day and nothing else whatsoever. She was almost convinced by this explanation when she finally prepared for sleep. The fox was at the gate when she opened it the next morning, not at the boundary markers where it had stopped the previous 2 days. At the gate itself, sitting on the inside of the settlement fence, which meant it had come through at some point in the night without anyone seeing or stopping it, which should not have been possible. The settlement maintained boundary wards specifically designed to keep animals out of the inhabited area during winter. Wards that had been laid by the king's own grandfather, according to the stories. Wards that were supposed to recognize pack blood, and only pack blood. She stared at it. It stared back at her. "How did you get in here?" she asked. The fox blinked its pale blue eyes with an air of supreme unconcern, and then stood and walked toward her with its tail held high in the manner of a cat making a social call. And she found herself, despite every reasonable objection she could formulate, reaching down to let it sniff her fingers. It pressed its cold nose against her knuckles for a moment, then rubbed the side of its face against her hand in a gesture so precisely like a greeting that her throat did something strange. "You cannot stay here," she told it. "You are an Arctic fox. You belong on the tundra." The fox sat down on her foot. She was still standing there, engaged in a one-sided argument with an animal whose position on the matter appeared to be settled when she became aware that she was being watched. She looked up. The king was leaning against the outer wall of the building across the narrow lane, arms crossed, dressed in the same practical riding clothes he had worn the day before. He was watching her and the fox with an expression that was the first openly unguarded thing she had seen on his face. It was not quite a smile. It was something adjacent to wonder, she thought. The expression of a person encountering something they had not expected and finding themselves genuinely uncertain what to do with it. "How long has it been doing that?" he asked, nodding at the fox, which had now moved from her foot to press against her ankle in the manner of a devoted dog. "Following me 2 days, Astrid said. She straightened up carefully, not wanting to disturb the fox, which seemed ridiculous, and then decided that her instincts on this occasion were probably as good as her logic. "Being inside the settlement wards, this appears to be a new development as of this morning. The boundary wards on this settlement were laid by my grandfather," he said, and there was something careful in his voice now, something that was controlling itself with visible effort. "They respond to blood recognition. Only those with pack blood can pass them freely." The words settled into the cold morning air between them. She heard them. She understood their grammatical structure and their individual component parts perfectly well. She did not immediately understand what they were telling her. "That is not possible," she said. "Arctic foxes do not have pack blood. They are ordinary animals." "Arctic white foxes," he said, and his voice was very quiet now, very precise, "are not ordinary animals. They have not been seen in the north since the fall of the Guardian bloodline 300 years ago." He pushed off from the wall and walked toward her. There was something different in how he moved now, something deliberate and intent that was different from the controlled stillness she had observed the day before. He stopped a few feet from her. The fox looked up at him, and then, to her absolute astonishment, made a sound she had never heard an Arctic fox make. Something between a chirp and a hum, low and resonant, before pressing itself more firmly against her ankle. The king crouched down to the fox's level and looked at it for a long moment. When he looked up at her, his eyes held a depth that suggested careful control over powerful currents beneath. "Tell me about your parents," he said. "I do not have parents," she said. The words came automatically worn smooth by repetition. "I was left at the settlement when I was 2 years old. Elder Marcus took me in. No family name was known for me, so I was given a name from the winter and the settlement location, as is done with foundlings here." She kept her voice even with the practice of someone who had told this particular story enough times that it had lost most of its capacity to cause her pain. Though not she had discovered all of it. "There is nothing to tell." He stood. He was looking at her with an intensity that she did not know how to hold without looking away, and she held it anyway because she had not survived 24 years as an Omega in a lichen settlement by allowing herself to flinch from discomfort. "The white fox recognizes you," he said. "The boundary wards recognize you." He paused. She watched something move across his face that he did not quite suppress in time. "And he said, another pause, longer this time. "I need to look into some records," he finished, and the careful control was back, and she was left with the distinct and destabilizing impression that he had stopped himself from saying something quite different. "Do not go to the ridge today," he said. "Stay within the settlement." It was not a request. She noticed this and decided to respond to it as if it were because she was not yet sure what the alternative meant. "Of course," she said. He looked at her for one more moment, something unreadable moving in those gray eyes, then turned and walked away through the morning without another word. The fox looked after him, then looked up at her. "I do not know what is happening, sir," she told it. She went to work. She found out in pieces over the course of a day that felt longer than most weeks she had lived. Elder Marcus came to the healing house in the mid-morning with an expression she had never seen on his face before. A combination of guilt and something that might have been relief at guilt finally having an appropriate outlet. He sat down in the chair she kept for patience and looked at his hands for a moment before looking at her. "There are things I should have told you years ago," he said. "I convinced myself I was protecting you. I am no longer certain that was the truth." She put down the herb she was preparing and sat down across from him and waited. He was not a man who could be rushed, and she had learned patience as a fundamental survival skill. The fox was curled on the floor near the small iron stove asleep, or performing an excellent imitation of sleep, its white tail wrapped around its nose. What Marcus told her took most of an hour and required 2 cups of tea that she made, and he drank without appearing to notice. He told her that the woman who had brought her to the settlement had not been a stranger. She had been a Wintermere by blood, though the name had been different then. A distant branch of a family that had once been something more than it was now. One of the last surviving members of a line that had been methodically erased over 3 centuries by those who considered certain bloodlines a political inconvenience. She had brought Astrid to the settlement with wounds that she had not survived. Deep slashes across her back and side, claw marks that went to the bone. The kind of injuries that came from being hunted by something that wanted you very dead and was willing to work for it. She had told Marcus with the last of her coherent hours that the child had been hidden since birth, that she was being hunted because of what she was, that she must continue to be hidden, that her wolf must not be allowed to wake until she was safe. He had not understood what she meant. He had taken the child and given her a name and kept the secret as he had been asked to keep it because the dying woman had frightened him with the intensity of her desperation. Because the child had been 2 years old and had done nothing to deserve whatever danger had chased her mother to the frontier. He had never told anyone. He had watched Astrid grow up and never manifest a wolf, and told himself that perhaps the dying woman had been wrong, or delirious, or that whatever the child had been born with had simply not survived the early years of hardship. He had told himself for 22 years that the silence was kindness. She sat with what he had told her for a long time after he left. The fox uncurled from its place by the stove and came to sit beside her chair, pressing its warm, small body against her calf. And she reached down without thinking and rested her hand on its back. She could feel its heartbeat through the thick white fur, fast and steady and somehow familiar in a way that had no rational basis. She thought about the word Marcus had used, guardian. She thought about what the king had said about the white fox and the boundary wards and the bloodline that had vanished 300 years ago. She thought about 6 years of waking on every full moon and feeling nothing when everyone around her felt everything. She thought about the way the fox had looked at her on the ridge path, that calm, ancient recognition. And she thought about the king's gray eyes and the thing he had almost said and stopped himself. The way he had looked at her with that expression she had not been able to name. And she thought that perhaps the name for it was the same word she was circling now. Afraid to land on it because landing on it would mean that her life was an entirely different shape than she had understood it to be for 24 years. She did not get to sit with this for as long as she needed. The knock on the door came in the early afternoon, and when she opened it, she found not the king as some part of her had apparently been expecting, but Lady Sarah Ashford, who stood in the doorway with the composed elegance of a woman who had decided to make a social call and was very much not asking permission. She was wearing a different gown today, deep wine red this time, and a fur-lined cloak that probably cost more than the healing house's entire annual supply budget. She smiled when Astrid opened the door, and it was a beautiful smile in the way that expensive things were beautiful, crafted and maintained and communicating in value rather than warmth. "May I come in?" she asked. Astrid stepped back. The fox woke up from its place by the stove and looked at Lady Sarah with the particular focused attention of a small predator, assessing something it had decided was relevant to its interests. Sarah looked at the fox and something moved behind her controlled expression, quickly suppressed. She sat in the chair Marcus had occupied that morning, crossed her ankles with the precision of someone who had been trained in deportment from childhood, and looked at Astrid with an evaluation that was thorough and unhurried and made no attempt to disguise itself. "You treated his guard very well," she said. "I am told you are the best healer in 3 territories." "I do not know who told you that," Astrid said, because it seemed important not to be managed into comfortable territory by compliments. "I know my work. Other healers in other territories know theirs." "Modesty is charming," Sarah said, and the lightness of her tone had a precise weight behind it, though occasionally it is merely a different form of strategy. She held Astrid's gaze. "He has been asking about you since last night," she said. "He sent 2 of his people to the settlement records and another to the territorial archive. He has not done that for a person since—" a pause. "Since never in my experience of him, which is considerable." The fox made a sound, not the chirp hum it had made for the king, something shorter, sharper. Sarah glanced at it. "That animal should not be here," she said. "It should not exist at all according to every record that has been properly maintained." The emphasis on properly was delicate and deliberate. "Someone has been careless with history," she continued, "or someone has been very careful with it." Astrid looked at her for a long moment. "The second one," she said quietly. Sarah's expression shifted into what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "Yes," she said, "exactly so." She rose, smoothing her cloak with hands that were steady and precise. "I came to tell you something that you may find useful to know," she said. "Kaelum Ironveil is a man who does what he believes is right, not what is convenient, not what is politically advisable, not what those around him, including me, recommend when it conflicts with his judgment." She paused at the door and looked back. "He makes decisions very slowly," she said, "and then he does not unmake them." Another pause. "Whatever he is looking for in those records, he already knows what he will find. He has known since he saw you with that fox. Men like him do not ask questions to gather information. They ask questions to understand why the information they already have is true." She left. The fox watched the door close and then returned to its position by the stove with an air of having reached a verdict on the matter. Astrid went back to work. She could not do anything else. Work had always been the architecture she built around things she could not yet hold. And she understood that she was not going to be able to hold any of this until she had more pieces. And the pieces were currently in the hands of a man going through records in some other part of the settlement. The wounded arrived as the afternoon light began to fail. Astrid heard them before she saw them. The clatter of a wagon moving too fast over frozen ground. Voices raised in pain and urgency. The particular quality of chaos that accompanied people who had experienced something terrible and were still trying to outrun it. She was at the door before the wagon fully stopped. 9 people, 3 of them barely conscious. Blood soaked through makeshift bandages that had been applied with more desperation than skill. The sharp copper smell of it cut through the cold air, mixing with wood smoke and fear. "Pine Haven," gasped the driver, a man in his 40s with ash streaked across his face. "They came at dawn. We lost 4. The healer's house burned. These are the worst wounded. The others stayed to fight the fires." Astrid was already moving, her mind shifting into the focused clarity that came with crisis. She pointed at 2 young men standing uselessly nearby. "You and you, help carry them inside. Gently, support the neck and spine." To another bystander, "Get me every clean sheet in the settlement. Boil water, 3 large pots. Now." The healing house had never held this many patients at once. She pushed tables together, laid out her instruments with rapid precision. The fox retreated to a corner, watching with those pale blue eyes as Astrid transformed the small space into something functional. The first patient was a woman, perhaps 30, with an arrow wound high on her shoulder. The second was a young man whose leg had been slashed open from knee to ankle. The third, the critical one, was an older man whose breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. His lips had a blue tinge that Astrid recognized immediately. Collapsed lung. She had read about the procedure, had studied the anatomical drawings until she could see them in her sleep, had never actually performed it on a living person because the settlement had never faced injuries this severe. Her hands did not shake as she prepared her instruments. The door opened. She did not look up, too focused on sterilizing the long needles she would need for the chest decompression. "What do you need?" The king's voice, low and steady. "Light," she said without hesitation. "Close, steady, and silence." He moved to her side, took the lantern from the wall, and held it exactly where she needed it. His presence was solid and calm and utterly unobtrusive. He seemed to understand instinctively that what she needed was not conversation, but simply another pair of hands that could follow direction. She worked in the bubble of focus that made everything else fall away. Located the intercostal space by touch and sight. Inserted the needle with controlled pressure, angling it carefully to avoid the neurovascular bundle. Felt the resistance, then the give, as it penetrated the pleural space. The hiss of escaping air was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. The man's breathing eased almost immediately. Color began to return to his lips. She withdrew the needle, placed a chest seal, and moved to the next patient without pause. The arrow wound required exploration. She had to ensure no fragments remained, that the subclavian artery was intact. Her fingers probed with delicate precision, while Kaelum held the light steady, his arm not wavering even slightly, despite the awkward angle. "Clamp," she said, and his free hand was already reaching for it, before she finished the word, passing it to her, with the smooth coordination of someone who understood the rhythm of urgent work. They worked together for 4 hours. She sutured in 3 layers, each stitch placed with the careful attention she would have given if she had all the time in the world, instead of 9 lives hanging in the balance. She created a pain management compound from frostroot and 3 other herbs, measuring by weight and touch, because her scales were too small for the quantities she needed. She organized blood donors from the watching crowd, matching types with the methodical precision she had taught herself from texts written by healers who worked in cities with proper hospitals. Kaelum assisted without being asked. He anticipated what she needed sometimes before she knew she needed it herself. When their hands touched in the transfer of instruments, there was that spark again. Stronger this time, undeniable. She felt it in her chest and in her fingertips and in some deep place that had no name. She ignored it and kept working. By the time she finished the last suture on the last patient, full dark had fallen. Her back ached. Her hands were stained with blood, despite repeated washing. Her head felt light in the way it did when she had gone too long without food or water. All 9 patients were stable. She stood at her preparation table, gripping the edge of it, and took the first deep breath in 4 hours that was not directly related to a medical decision. "You should sit down," Kaelum said quietly. "I am fine. You have been standing for 4 hours. You saved 9 lives. Sit down." It was not quite an order, but it was also not quite a suggestion. She sat. He brought her water and made her drink it. Then he brought tea that someone had left by the door, still hot, and made her drink that too. They sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, she could hear the settlement beginning to settle back into itself after the chaos. Inside, the only sounds were the quiet breathing of sleeping patients and the soft crackle of the fire. "That man with the collapsed lung," Kaelum said finally. "I have seen field physicians refuse that procedure. Too dangerous, they say. Too likely to cause more harm than good." "The procedure itself is not complicated," Astrid said. "It only requires understanding of thoracic anatomy and steady hands." "You have both." She looked at him. He was watching her with that expression again, the one she still could not quite name. "You are very good at what you do," he said. "Not competent, not adequate, exceptional." She did not know what to say to that. Compliments from pack members usually came wrapped in surprise that the Omega without a wolf could manage anything useful at all. This was different. "Where did you learn the meteorology?" he asked. The change of subject startled her. "What? Yesterday, when we arrived, I heard someone mention that you had warned the hunters about the storm, that you predicted it 12 hours before it hit, using radio patterns and cloud formations." "I taught myself," she said. "There is a radio at the trading post. Sometimes I can pick up weather broadcasts from the cities. I started listening 6 years ago, writing down patterns, comparing them to what actually happened. Eventually, I learned to recognize the signs." "Why?" She looked at him, uncertain what he was asking. "Why did you teach yourself?" he clarified. "It is not part of healing work." She was quiet for a moment, deciding how much truth to offer. "Because knowing when storms are coming means knowing when it is safe to travel to the ridge for herbs," she said finally, "and when it is not. And because hunters who get caught in blizzards sometimes do not come back. And I thought," she paused, "I thought that if I could give them better information, maybe fewer of them would die." He was looking at her with an intensity that made something in her chest feel tight. "How many?" he asked softly. "How many what? How many hunters do you think you have saved with your weather predictions over 6 years?" She had never counted, had never allowed herself to frame it that way. "I do not know," she said. "More than a dozen," he said. It was not a question. "Probably more than 2 dozen." She did not confirm or deny it. You created value from exclusion, he said. You served this pack better than most who were born with every advantage you lacked. There was something in his voice that she had not heard before, something that sounded almost like anger, but was not directed at her. They should not have made you feel like you were less, he said quietly, for lacking something that they decided determined worth. Her throat felt strange. She took another sip of tea to give herself something to do. I built a life I could be proud of, she said, and her voice was steady. That is what matters. Yes, he said, it is. The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. Heavier. Full of things neither of them was saying. The fox stirred in its corner, stood stretched, and padded over to them. It looked from Astrid to Kaelum and back then made that soft chirping hum again before settling between them, its body touching both of their feet. It has claimed you, Kaelum said, something strange in his voice. It seems to have opinions about a great many things, Astrid replied. Arctic white foxes, he said slowly, were known as harbingers in the old texts, messengers of the guardian bloodline. They appeared when a guardian was about to come into power, when the old magic was preparing to wake. He looked at the fox, then at her. They were not pets, he continued. They were not companions in the way wolves are companions. They were, he paused, searching for words. Extensions. Physical manifestations of guardian magic that took form in the world before the guardian themselves fully awakened. The words settled between them like snow. I do not understand, Astrid said. Neither do I, he admitted. Not fully, but I know what the records say, and I know what I see. He leaned forward slightly. The fox did not get through the boundary wards because it has pack blood, he said. It got through because it is you, or part of you. The part that has been trying to wake for 6 years and could not because you were not safe enough, not strong enough, not ready. She stared at him. That is not possible. You said that yesterday about the fox getting through the wards at all. This is different. Is it? She looked down at the foam. It looked back at her with those pale blue eyes, and for just a moment she could have sworn she felt what it was feeling, the warmth of the fire, the texture of the floor beneath its paws, the contentment of being exactly where it belonged. She pulled her foot back. The sensation vanished. I do not have magic, she said, and her voice was not quite steady. I do not have a wolf. I am just a healer who knows herbs and suturing techniques. You are a healer who taught herself meteorology to save lives, Kaelum said, who mapped 200 square miles of territory despite having no official need to do so, who just performed a procedure that trained physicians hesitate to attempt, who has a creature that has been extinct for 300 years following her around like it recognizes her as something essential to its existence. He paused. You are more than what you have allowed yourself to believe. The use of her name, unspoken but implied in his tone, did something to her that she did not have words for. Before she could respond, the door opened. One of Kaelum's guards stood there, his expression grim. Your Majesty, we found the informant, the one who has been reporting to the Eastern Territory. He confessed. Lord Draven Ashford has been paying him for information about settlement activities. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. How much? Kaelum asked, his voice gone cold and flat. 5,000 for regular reports. 250,000 offered for confirmation of a specific target's death. The guard's eyes flicked to Astrid for just a moment. Kaelum stood slowly. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet and very controlled, and somehow more dangerous for it. Draven Ashford is coming here. Is he not? Our scouts report a force of approximately 150 riders heading this way from the Eastern Territory border. They will arrive by tomorrow evening at latest. The council members accompanying him have sent word ahead demanding formal assembly. They claim they are coming to attend the winter solstice observation. And actually, the guards said, looking at Astrid again, they are coming to ensure that certain bloodlines do not resurface. Silence. Kaelum's hands, Astrid noticed, had curled into fists at his sides. 300 years, he said softly. They hunted them for 300 years, and they think they can finish it now. He turned to Astrid. Your mother, he said, the woman who brought you here. She had claw marks, Marcus said. Deep ones. The kind that come from a sustained hunt. Astrid nodded slowly, her heart beginning to pound. Draven Ashford led the final purge of the Guardian bloodline 22 years ago. Kaelum said, I found the records this afternoon. His name is on the operational orders. He personally commanded the hunt that drove the last known Guardian families into hiding. He looked at her with something that might have been rage or grief or both. He killed your mother, Astrid, and now he is coming to finish what he started. The fox made a sound that was nothing like the gentle chirp hum. This was sharp. Warning. It stood and moved to Astrid's side, pressing against her leg with its entire body tense. How long do we have? Kaelum asked his guard. 36 hours, maybe less if they push hard. Double the perimeter watch. Send riders to the nearest settlements for reinforcements. And get me every record we have on Guardian abilities. Every text, every fragment, everything. Yes, Your Majesty. The guard left. Kaelum turned back to Astrid, and his expression had shifted into something else. Something both harder and more gentle at once. I need you to understand something, he said. What is coming for you is not random. It is not opportunistic. It is methodical elimination of a perceived threat. Draven controls trade routes worth 340 million a year that run through what used to be Guardian territory. If a Guardian returns and reclaims that land, he loses everything. So this is about money, Astrid said. This is about power built on erased history, Kaelum corrected. Money is just how we measure it now. He moved closer, and she found herself unable to look away from those gray eyes. You have 3 days until the winter solstice, he said. That is the deadline in every text about Guardian awakenings. The moment when the old magic is strongest, when transformation becomes possible. If your wolf does not wake by then I am just an Omega healer that someone wants dead for reasons I still do not fully understand, she finished. No, he said. Then you are a woman with Guardian blood who is being hunted by someone with the resources and motivation to succeed, and I am going to prevent that from happening. Why? The question came out before she could stop it. He looked at her for a long moment. Because my wolf recognized you the moment I saw you standing with that fox, he said finally. Because every text about the Guardian bloodline says that the Iron King line and the Guardian line have been bound together since before the pack structure existed. Because there is supposed to be a balance, and it has been broken for 300 years, and I have been fighting feral madness since I was 14 years old, and I know in every bone of my body that you are the reason it might finally stop. He took a breath. And because I have spent 12 years as a symbol and a crown and a political calculation, and when you looked at me yesterday while suturing that guard, you looked at me like I was just a person. And I have not felt that in longer than I can measure. The honesty of it hung in the air between them. Astrid did not know what to say, did not trust herself to speak. Will you let me help you, he asked. I do not know how you can help me become something I have shown no sign of being for 6 years. Then let me help you survive the next 3 days, he said, and we will discover the rest together. She looked at the fox, at the 9 sleeping patients who would have died without her, at her herb stores and her carefully organized medical supplies, and the life she had built from the materials she had been given. Yes, she said. All right. The next morning, Astrid woke to find the fox pacing. She had never seen it pace before. It moved in tight circles near the door, its tail low, its ears flat. Every few seconds it would stop and look at her with those pale blue eyes, then resume its circuit. What is wrong? She asked it, then felt foolish for expecting an answer. But the fox stopped. It looked at her directly, and then it did something that made her breath catch. It vanished. Not ran away, not hid. Vanished. One moment it was there, white fur and pale eyes and solid warmth. The next moment, there was only air and the faintest shimmer of light that faded even as she watched. And then it was back, standing in the same spot, looking at her as if to say, did you see that? Did you understand? Her heart was pounding. No, she whispered. That is not possible. You are an animal. You are not. The fox tilted its head. You are not me, she finished. It made the chirping hum, walked to her, pressed its nose against her hand, and she felt it. The sensation was like nothing she had ever experienced, as if some part of her that had been numb for her entire life suddenly had feeling restored. She could sense the fox's heartbeat as clearly as her own, could feel the cool air on its fur, could taste the lingering scent of wood smoke in its sensitive nose. She jerked her hand back, and the sensation cut off like a door slamming shut. I do not understand this, she said. The door opened. She looked up, expecting another patient, and found the fox's shimmer and vanish had drawn a witness. Kaelum stood in the doorway. He had seen it. She could tell by the expression on his face. How long has it been able to do that? He asked. I do not know. That was the first time I have seen it. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him. The texts say that harbingers become more active as the awakening approaches, he said. They test boundaries. Demonstrate abilities. Prepare the guardian for what is coming. I am not a guardian. The fox seems to disagree. She looked at him, and something in her chest was pulling tight, winding itself into knots of fear and hope and confusion. I am afraid, she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. I am afraid that everyone is wrong, that this is some strange coincidence, and there is no magic waking, and my wolf is simply never going to come, and in 3 days I will still be exactly what I have always been. Except now I will also be dead, because a man I have never met wants to protect his trade routes. Kaelum crossed the space between them and did something she had not expected. He took her hands. His grip was warm and solid and steady. I have been Alpha King for 12 years, he said. I have made decisions that determine the outcomes of battles and treaties in the lives of 340,000 people. I have never once been certain I was ready before I did any of it. He looked at her with those gray eyes that saw more than she wanted them to see. Ready is not a condition that exists before necessary things happen, he said. It emerges during them. For people who are fundamentally capable. And if I am not capable of this, you are capable of saving 9 lives with frontier supplies and teaching yourself sciences you had no training in and building a practice that serves people who never showed you the respect you earned, he said. You are capable of surviving being treated as less than for 6 years and still showing up every day to heal the people who made you feel that way. You are the most capable person I have met in a very long time, Astrid. Tomorrow you will simply have the power to match what you have always had inside you. The words settled into her like warmth into cold bones. Thank you, she whispered. He held her hands for another moment, then released them, and she felt the loss of contact like a physical thing. Come with me, he said. There is something you need to see. He led her through the settlement to the main hall where he had spread maps and documents across the largest table. His inner circle was there, the guards she had met, a woman she did not recognize, an older man with kind eyes. Astrid Wintermere, Kaelum said formally. These are the people I trust with my life, Beta Cade, Scout Mira, Dr. Oren, Strategist Finn, and Lady Sarah Ashford, whom you have met. Sarah inclined her head with something that looked like genuine respect. We are planning the defense of this settlement against my father's forces, she said calmly, and I find myself on your side of it rather than his, which is not where I expected to be when I woke up 3 days ago. Why? Astrid asked. Because I read the records, Sarah said, all 300 pages of them. And I saw my father's name on documents ordering the elimination of women and children whose only crime was being born to a bloodline he wanted erased. And I decided that whatever I thought I wanted from my life, it was not going to be built on that foundation. She looked at Astrid directly. Also, she added, the fox looked at you the way the old texts describe, like you were pack and home and purpose all at once. And I have spent my entire life around powerful people, and I have never seen anything look at anyone that way. So either you are what the records say, or the universe is playing a very cruel joke. And I do not think the universe jokes. Kaelum gestured to the maps. You told me you mapped 200 square miles of territory, he said to Astrid. Show me. She stepped forward, and for the next hour she showed them everything she knew. The terrain, the defensible positions, the routes that could be watched with few people, the places where weather patterns created natural advantages. They listened. All of them. And they took her information and incorporated it into their planning as if her voice carried exactly the same weight as the Alpha King's. As if she was not an Omega without a wolf, but simply a person with knowledge that was needed. For the first time in 6 years, Astrid felt something shift inside her. Not her wolf waking, something else. Something that felt like the architecture of her own worth, reconstructing itself on a foundation that was not determined by what she lacked. We have 30 hours, Kaelum said as the afternoon light began to fail, before Draven arrives, and 15 hours after that until midnight on the solstice. The timing is not coincidence. He looked at Astrid. He is betting that you will not awaken in time, he said, that he can eliminate you before you become something he cannot eliminate. And if his bet is correct, she asked. Then we fight anyway, Kaelum said, and we find another way to keep you alive. But I do not think his bet is correct. Why not? He glanced at the fox which had followed them and was now sitting at Astrid's feet. Because that creature has been waiting for you, he said, and I do not think it would be here if the waiting was about to be for nothing. The sun set early this far north in December, and with it came the kind of cold that could kill the unprepared in hours. Astrid stood at the settlement's northern wall, watching the first stars appear in a sky so clear, It looked like black glass. The fox sat beside her, its white fur almost luminous in the gathering dark. She could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the maps spread across the table in the main hall. The defensive positions marked in Kaelum's precise hand. The estimated arrival time of Draven Ashford's forces written in red like a countdown to something inevitable. 28 hours until they arrived. 13 hours after that until midnight on the winter solstice. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. She was learning the particular rhythm of them, the weight and cadence that belonged only to him. "You should be resting," Kaelum said, coming to stand beside her at the wall. "So should you." "I have not been able to rest properly in 12 years. Tonight is no different." She looked at him. In the starlight, his face was all shadows and strong lines, but his eyes caught the faint light and reflected it back like a wolf's. "The feral madness," she said. "You mentioned it before. What does it feel like?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought perhaps she had overstepped, asked for something too personal. But then he spoke, his voice low and careful. "It feels like drowning," he said, "except you are drowning in your own wolf. Every full moon, the wolf wants to take control completely. Not the way it does for normal lichens, where human and wolf exist in balance. My wolf wants to erase the human part entirely, leave only instinct and rage and hunger." He looked out at the dark landscape. "I fight it," he continued, "every month. And every month it gets a little harder to win. The curse was placed on my bloodline 4 generations ago by someone who thought the Iron Kings had too much power. That we needed a weakness built in, a guarantee that we would eventually destroy ourselves." "How long do you have?" she asked quietly. 2 years, Dr. Oren estimates. Maybe less. Before the wolf wins permanently, and I become something that needs to be put down for everyone's safety." The words were matter of fact, but she heard the weight beneath them, the knowledge of his own ticking clock. "The texts say that Guardian presence can break the curse," he said. "That the balance between Iron King and Guardian is not just political or symbolic. It is actual, physical. The Guardian's power stabilizes the Iron King's wolf, prevents the slide into madness." He turned to look at her. "I did not come here because of that," he said. "I need you to know that. I came because reports of an extinct creature appearing in a frontier settlement demanded investigation. I would have come regardless. But when I saw you with that fox, when my wolf recognized you," he paused. "It was the first time in 12 years that the madness quieted without a fight." Astrid's throat felt tight. "I cannot promise to be what you need," she said. "I cannot even promise to survive the next 2 days." "I am not asking for promises," Kaelum said. "I am telling you what is true. My wolf knows what you are, even if you do not yet know it yourself. And if that is selfish of me to be glad that you exist even though it puts you in danger, then I am selfish. But I will spend every resource I have to keep you alive long enough to discover what you are capable of becoming." The fox made a soft sound, almost approving. "It has opinions about everything," Astrid said, grateful for the shift in intensity. "It is part of you," Kaelum said. "So yes, it has your opinions. I do not have opinions about most of what it chirps at. Perhaps it has the opinions you would have if you were not being so carefully controlled all the time." She looked at him sharply. "I am not controlled." "You are the most controlled person I have ever met," he said, but there was no judgment in it. "You have spent 6 years managing other people's perceptions of you, making yourself useful enough to keep, competent enough to need, never asking for anything, never taking up more space than absolutely necessary. That is control, Astrid. That is survival strategy so deeply ingrained you do not even see it anymore." The accuracy of it hit her like a physical blow. "And if I stopped," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "then you might discover that you are allowed to want things," he said, "to be angry about injustice done to you, to take up exactly as much space as you need, to ask for help, to accept that you are not required to earn your right to exist through constant usefulness." He moved slightly closer. "You might discover," he said, "that the person standing next to you sees you as already complete rather than perpetually lacking, and that you do not have to do anything to deserve that. It simply is." She could not breathe properly, could not think past the feeling of something long frozen beginning to crack. The moment stretched between them, full of things neither of them was quite saying. Then the fox stood abruptly, its ears forward, its body tense. A heartbeat later, Astrid heard it too. Hoofbeats, fast and getting faster. Kaelum's hand went to the knife at his belt in a motion so smooth it looked practiced to the point of instinct. But it was only one rider coming from the south gate, one of the scouts. The man dismounted before his horse fully stopped breathing hard. Your Majesty, movement on the southern ridge, not Ashford's main force. Smaller party, maybe 6 riders, moving fast. They will be here within the hour. Positions, Kaelum demanded. Beta Cade is organizing the watch. But Your Majesty, they are not approaching like an attack force. They are approaching like people running from something. Kaelum looked at Astrid. Get inside, bar the door. If I send someone for you, they will use the phrase winter meridian. Anyone else, you do not open that door. Kaelum. Please, he said, and the use of just his name, instead of any title, made her understand how serious this was. She went. The healing house felt too small, suddenly too exposed. She checked the locks, pulled the heavy interior bar across the door, and then stood in the center of the room with her heart pounding and the fox pressing against her legs. She heard the riders arrive, heard the clatter and shout, and then a woman's voice, high and strained, saying something she could not quite make out. Minutes passed like hours. Then a knock on the door. Winter Meridian, it is Sarah. You need to come now. Astrid opened the door. Sarah stood there, her perfect composure fractured around the edges. Behind her in the settlement square, Astrid could see the new arrivals. 5 people, all of them showing signs of hard travel. And in the center of them, being supported by 2 of Kaelum's guards, a woman whose face was streaked with ash, and whose eyes held the hollow look of someone who had seen something terrible. They are from Pine Haven, Sarah said quietly. The settlement that was attacked 3 days ago. They have been hiding in the forest since then. They came because they have information about who attacked them. And they saw the ones who gave the orders, Sarah said. They saw my father. The woman from Pine Haven sat in the main hall, a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of something hot in her shaking hands. Her name was Margaret. She had been the baker there. Now she was a survivor with a story that made the temperature in the room feel like it dropped 10 degrees. They came at dawn, she said, her voice hoarse. We thought it was a pack dispute at first. Territorial challenge. But they were not trying to claim the land. They were looking for someone. Who, Kaelum asked, though Astrid suspected he already knew. Anyone who had come from the north recently. Any newcomers. Any women traveling alone or with children. Margaret's hands tightened on the cup. They had a description. White blonde hair, unusual pale eyes, mid-20s. They said she was a criminal, a pretender to bloodlines that no longer existed. Every eye in the room turned to Astrid. They burned the healer's house first, Margaret continued, because healers keep records, birth records, immigration records. They wanted to make sure there was no paper trail of anyone matching that description passing through. Did they find anyone? Sarah asked. No, because no one like that had come through Pine Haven, but that did not stop them from killing Thomas and his wife when they tried to protect the records. Or young Jacob, who tried to put out the fires. Or Sarah, who happened to be in the wrong place when they were looking for someone to question. Margaret looked directly at Astrid. I saw the man who gave the orders, she said. Tall, silver hair, expensive furs. He had a sigil on his cloak. A hawk with spread wings over 3 mountains. And he told his men that Pine Haven was just the first settlement, that they would search every frontier outpost until they found the guardian pretender and eliminated the threat to the natural order. That is my father's sigil, Sarah said, her voice hollow. And those are his words. Natural order. He has been saying that for as long as I can remember. That the guardian bloodline upset the natural order of power. That their elimination was necessary for stability. She looked at Astrid, and there were tears in her eyes. I am sorry, she whispered. I am so sorry. I did not know the full extent of what he had done. I thought the guardian hunts were just history, ancient conflicts that ended generations ago. I did not know he was still actively pursuing it, still willing to kill innocent people just to ensure no one with that bloodline survived. Kaelum stood, his face was carved from ice. How many people does he have with him now? The scouts counted 150, Beta Cade said. Armed, organized, moving like military, not like delegates coming to observe a solstice. He is not coming to observe, Kaelum said. He is coming to finish what he started 22 years ago when he killed Astrid's mother. And he is willing to burn down every settlement in the northern frontier to do it. He turned to his assembled advisors. We have 24 hours before he arrives. We cannot evacuate the settlement. There is nowhere to go in this cold. We cannot surrender Astrid because that is not an option I will entertain, which means we defend. And we prepare for the possibility that we are defending not just against Draven's forces, but against whatever legal authority he has managed to accumulate to justify this. He will demand a trial, Sarah said quietly. That is how he operates. He will arrive with council members, with documentation, with legal frameworks. He will accuse Astrid of fraud, of impersonating a bloodline that he has proof no longer exists. And if she cannot demonstrate beyond doubt that she is guardian, he will have the legal right under old pack law to execute her. The words landed like stones. Then we make sure she can demonstrate it, Kaelum said. How? Astrid asked, her voice sharper than she intended. I have spent 6 years trying to feel something, anything that would indicate I have a wolf. There is nothing there. What makes you think 24 hours will be different? Kaelum looked at her steadily. Because the fox is pacing again, he said. She looked down. He was right. The fox was moving in tight circles, its agitation visible to everyone in the room. And because, Kaelum continued, Dr. Oren has been researching guardian awakenings all day, and he has something to tell you. The old physician stepped forward. He had kind eyes and the careful movements of someone who had spent a lifetime working with bodies and understood their fragility. The reason you have not awakened, Dr. Oren said gently, is not because you lack a wolf. It is because your wolf has been suppressed, deliberately, as a protection mechanism. I do not understand. Your mother knew she was being hunted, he said. The texts describe a technique very rare, very dangerous, where a guardian can suppress their child's wolf in the womb. Delay the awakening until the child is old enough and safe enough to handle the transformation. It is meant to protect the child from being detected by those hunting guardian bloodlines. He gestured to ancient texts spread across a side table. The suppression breaks at a specific trigger, he said. Not age, not full moons, but recognition. When the guardian's destined mate recognizes them, the suppression begins to fail. The wolf begins to wake. It is why the fox appeared when it did, why it led you directly into the path of the Alpha King. Astrid felt the room tilt slightly. You are saying my wolf has been there the entire time, she said slowly. Just locked away. Not just your wolf, Dr. Oren corrected. Your guardian power. All of it, waiting for the moment when you were safe enough for it to emerge. And you believe I am safe enough now. She laughed, and it sounded slightly hysterical even to her own ears. There is an army coming to kill me in less than a day. But you are not alone, Kaelum said quietly. That is the difference. Your mother was alone, hunted, terrified. She suppressed your power to keep you hidden because she had no one to protect you. Now you have, he gestured to the room, to his guards and advisors, to Sarah who had turned against her own father, to the settlement residents who had gathered outside murmuring about defending their healer. Now you have an Alpha King who has claimed you as his mate in all but the formal ceremony, he said. You have people willing to fight for you. You are not alone, and that changes everything. The fox stopped pacing. It looked at Astrid, and she felt that sensation again. The connection, stronger this time. She could feel its heartbeat sinking with her own, could feel something vast beneath the surface of her awareness and pressing against boundaries that were beginning to crack. The solstice is the optimal time, Dr. Oren said. Midnight tomorrow, when the barrier between the old magic and the new world is thinnest. But the awakening will not be gentle. It has been suppressed for 24 years. When it breaks free, it will be, he searched for words, overwhelming. Will it hurt? Astrid asked. I do not know, he said honestly. The texts describe it as both the most painful and the most transcendent experience a guardian ever endures. Rebirth tends to involve both. Astrid looked at Kaelum, at his gray eyes that watched her like she was something precious and powerful and worth protecting. What do I need to do? She asked. Tonight you rest, he said. Tomorrow we defend. Tomorrow night at midnight you let yourself become what you have always been. The night passed in fragments. Astrid did not sleep so much as drift in and out of a state that was neither waking nor true rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt it. The thing beneath her skin that Dr. Oren said was her wolf, her guardian power, all the magic that had been locked away for her entire life. It felt like pressure, like something massive trying to fit itself through a space too small to accommodate it. The fox stayed close, its body warm against her side. At dawn, the scouts reported that Draven Ashford's forces had been sighted 10 miles out. They would arrive by early afternoon. Kaelum assembled everyone in the main square, settlement residents, his own guards, the survivors from Pinehaven, everyone who was willing to stand and fight. There were perhaps 45 people in total, against 150. The odds were not good. We are not trying to win a battle, Kaelum said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. We are trying to survive until midnight. That is the goal. Hold the settlement. Protect Astrid Wintermere. Give her the time she needs. He looked at each person individually. Some of you have known Astrid her entire life. Some of you met her 3 days ago. But all of you have benefited from her skill. She has saved your lives or the lives of people you love. She has asked for nothing in return except to be allowed to do her work in peace. Now I am asking you to give her something back. 12 hours, that is all. 12 hours of standing between her and people who want her dead for the crime of being born to a bloodline they fear. An older woman stepped forward. Astrid recognized her. Maria, whose grandson Astrid had saved from pneumonia 2 winters ago. You have my blade, Maria said, and my wolf, for as long as both last. One by one others stepped forward. The baker, the blacksmith, young hunters and old warriors, each pledging themselves to a fight they had not asked for a woman who had spent 6 years being invisible to most of them. Astrid felt something break in her chest, not her suppression. Something else. The belief that she did not matter, that she was only as valuable as her immediate usefulness, that she was fundamentally alone. These people were choosing to stand with her, not because she had earned it through years of service, though she had, but because it was right, because she was one of them, Omega or not, Wolf or not, because the healer who had asked for nothing deserved something in return. Kaelum found her after the assembly as she was checking her medical supplies one final time, preparing for the casualties she knew were coming. However this ends, he said, I need to tell you something. She looked up from her inventory of bandages and sutures. When I saw you for the first time, he said, when you were treating my guard with that absolute focus, I felt something I have not felt since I was a child, for the crown and the responsibility and the weight of 340,000 lives on my shoulders. He moved closer. I felt seen, he said simply, not as the Alpha King, not as a political asset or a military commander or a symbol of power, just as a person. You looked at me and saw a man, and you treated me with exactly the same straightforward honesty you would treat anyone. And I realized I had been starving for that without even knowing it. Kaelum. Let me finish, he said gently. I am not standing between you and Draven's forces because of ancient texts about destined mates. I am doing it because in 3 days you have reminded me what it feels like to be human instead of just a crown. And I am not willing to lose that. I am not willing to lose you. He reached out and took her hand. Whatever happens today, he said, whatever you become or do not become tonight, this is true. I see you, Astrid Wintermere, all of you, the healer and the cartographer and the woman who taught herself meteorology to save lives, the person who turned rejection into purpose, who made herself essential through skill rather than birthright, the guardian who is about to wake up. All of it, and all of it is worth protecting. She could not speak past the tightness in her throat, could not find words adequate to what she was feeling. So she did the only thing that felt true. She kissed him. It was brief and fierce and tasted like determination and hope, and the kind of desperate courage it took to choose connection on the edge of a battle. When they pulled apart, his eyes had gone silver at the edges, his wolf responding to her, even though her own wolf was still locked away. That was, he started. If you tell me that was inappropriate, she said, I will instruct the fox to bite you. He laughed. It was a surprise, genuine sound that transformed his face into something younger and lighter. I was going to say he said that it was worth waiting 12 years for. The fox chirped approvingly. They heard the army before they saw it. The sound of 150 horses moving in formation carried across the frozen landscape like distant thunder. Astrid stood on the settlement's northern wall with Kaelum on one side and the fox on the other watching the horizon. When they appeared, it was not as a raiding force. It was as a delegation. Draven Ashford rode at the head of his forces, flanked by 5 men in council robes. Behind them, rows of armed riders in perfect formation. They carried banners that proclaimed this an official council investigation, not an act of war. It was Astrid realized brilliant strategy. If Kaelum tried to defend her by force, it would be an Alpha King refusing a legitimate council inquiry. Political suicide. They stopped at the settlement boundary. Draven himself dismounted and walked forward with the careful confidence of a man who held all the power in a situation. He was tall, silver-haired, expensive, in the way that old money was expensive. His face was handsome in a cruel way, all sharp angles and cold eyes. Alpha King Kaelum Ironveil, he called out, his voice carrying easily. I come on behalf of the Eastern Council with a matter of territorial importance. We request formal assembly to address accusations of bloodline fraud. Kaelum's face was carved from stone. Lord Draven Ashford, he replied, his voice equally formal. Your request is acknowledged. Assembly will convene at sunset in the main hall. All parties will be heard according to pack law. And the accused will be present. The accused, Kaelum said with the barest edge of steel in his voice, is under the protection of the Alpha King. She will be present, and she will be heard. Draven smiled. It did not reach his eyes. Excellent, he said. I do so appreciate when proper procedures are followed. He gestured, and his forces began to establish a camp just outside the settlement boundary. A show of force dressed up as legal propriety. Astrid felt sick. He is going to win, she said quietly. He has council authority. He has documentation. He has everything he needs to make this look legitimate. He has those things, Kaelum agreed, but he does not have you, and he does not know what you are about to become. What if I do not become anything? The fear finally escaped, raw and desperate. What if midnight comes and I am still just me, and he wins his trial and I... Kaelum turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders firm and grounding. Then we fight our way out and run, he said, and we keep you alive until we find another way. But Astrid, listen to me. The fox appeared because your awakening is coming. The suppression is breaking. I can feel it. My wolf can feel it. You are standing on the edge of something massive, and all you need to do is stop fighting it and let it happen. I do not know how to stop fighting, she whispered. I have been fighting to survive for 6 years, fighting to be useful enough to keep, fighting to prove I have value despite lacking what everyone else has. I do not know how to just let go. Then I will teach you, he said, tonight, after the trial, when midnight comes and the solstice reaches its peak. I will be there, and you will not be alone, and you will let yourself become everything you were always meant to be. The fox pressed against her leg, warm and solid and utterly certain. Promise me something, she said, anything. If it goes wrong, if I do not wake, or if I wake as something dangerous, something feral, that will not happen. Promise me anyway, she insisted. Promise me you will do what needs to be done to protect everyone else. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. She blinked. What? No, he repeated. I will not promise to give up on you under any circumstance. I will not promise to choose the easy path of elimination over the hard path of helping you through whatever comes. You have spent 6 years being told you are disposable. I will not reinforce that belief, not even to make you feel temporarily safer. He leaned his forehead against hers. You are not disposable, he said fiercely. You are essential. And whatever happens tonight, we face it together. That is the only promise I will make. Sunset came too quickly. The main hall was packed. Settlement residents on one side, Draven's forces on the other, council members seated at a raised table at the front. Kaelum stood as Alpha King, technically presiding, but also technically barred from interfering in a council matter. It was a legal trap, and everyone knew it. Astrid sat in a chair that felt like an accused dock. The fox sat at her feet, the only comfort allowed. Draven stood to present his case. Members of the council, he began, his voice smooth and practiced. We are here to address a matter of significant territorial importance. A woman claiming to be of the Guardian bloodline has appeared in the northern frontier. This bloodline was declared extinct 300 years ago after the last verified Guardian died without heir. He pulled out documents, spreading them across the table. I have here the official records, he said, genealogies, death certificates, historical accounts from 6 separate sources, all confirming that the Guardian line ended in the year 1724. No verified Guardian has been documented since. He turned to Astrid. This woman claims otherwise. She claims to carry blood that does not exist. She has produced no documentation, no proof, no genealogical evidence. Just a wild animal that follows her in the testimony of people who want to believe in fairy tales. One of the council members, an older man with cold eyes, spoke up. What evidence does the accused offer? Kaelum stood. The boundary wards recognize her. They were laid specifically to respond to pack blood, and she passes through them freely. Wards can be fooled, Draven said smoothly. With sufficient knowledge of magic, any competent practitioner could create a temporary bypass. The white Arctic fox is extinct, Kaelum countered. Yet one appears and follows her specifically. Foxes of that kind were known as guardian harbingers. An albino fox, Draven said with a dismissive wave, a genetic mutation mistaken for something mystical by people who want to see signs and wonders. Back and forth it went. Every piece of evidence Kaelum presented, Draven had a counter-explanation. Every argument for Astrid's legitimacy, he had a rebuttal that sounded just plausible enough. Finally, the council leader held up a hand. Enough, he said. Words and theories will not settle this. If the accused claims to be guardian, let her demonstrate guardian abilities. The old texts are clear. Guardians could sense pack bonds, could command any wolf with their voice, could feel the territory itself as if it were part of their own body. He looked at Astrid. Demonstrate one of these abilities, he said. Provide proof beyond doubt, or submit to the council's judgment that you are a fraud. One of the council members leaned forward. The accused has had 3 days since the Alpha King's arrival. 3 days to prepare this demonstration. Surely if she possessed guardian abilities, she would have shown some sign by now. The suppression, Kaelum began, is a convenient excuse, Draven interrupted. Guardian bloodline or not, a wolf is a wolf. It manifests at 18. She is 24. 6 years of nothing. That is not suppression, that is absence. He turned to the council members, his voice taking on the practiced cadence of a man who had won many arguments through rhetoric alone. I do not deny that this woman may have some distant connection to the guardian line, he said. Many families do. Bloodlines scatter over centuries. But connection is not the same as power. Heritage is not the same as ability. And claiming a title without demonstrating the capacity to fulfill it is the very definition of fraud. The council members nodded, several of them shifting in their seats with the body language of people being persuaded. We have, Draven continued, 6 independent historical sources confirming the guardian line's end in 1724. We have genealogical records. We have 3 centuries of absence. And we have a woman with an animal companion and a convenient story about suppression that conveniently cannot be verified until precisely the moment when it would save her from judgment. He looked at Astrid directly. I take no pleasure in this, he said, his voice softening into false sympathy. But the law must be applied equally. If we allow people to claim bloodlines, they cannot prove we invite chaos. Today it is guardian. Tomorrow it will be Iron King or Elder Council or any title that carries privilege. We must have standards. The hall went silent. Astrid stood slowly. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. I cannot, she said, and her voice was steady even though everything inside her was screaming. I do not have access to those abilities. Not yet. Not yet, Draven pounced on the words, or not ever. How convenient that you need more time, more preparation, more excuses. The solstice, Kaelum said, are one. Guardian awakenings happen at midnight on the winter solstice. That is 4 hours from now. Give her until then. The trial is now, the council leader said. We will not wait on mystical timing. Then you are not seeking truth, Sarah said, standing abruptly. You are seeking a predetermined outcome. Her father turned to her, his face darkening. Seraphina, sit down. No, she said, I will not. I have been silent too long about things I knew were wrong, but I am done being silent. She walked to the center of the room and pulled out papers from inside her cloak. I have here, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, documentation from my father's personal files, orders given 22 years ago to eliminate the remaining guardian families, financial records showing payments to hunters, correspondence describing a systematic campaign to erase a bloodline from existence. Draven's face went white, then red. Those are private documents, he hissed. Stolen. They are not admissible. They are proof, Sarah said, and there were tears streaming down her face now, that you have been hunting guardians for decades, that you killed Astrid's mother, that you burned Pine Haven settlement 3 days ago looking for her, that you have built your fortune on land that belonged to guardians, and you wanted to ensure they could never come back to reclaim it. She looked at the council members. This is not a trial about fraud, she said. This is an attempted execution disguised as legal process. And I will not let my father murder an innocent woman just to protect his illegal holdings. The hall erupted. Draven lunged toward his daughter, but Kaelum's guards were faster. They intercepted him, holding him back as he screamed obscenities. The council members were arguing among themselves. Draven's forces were moving toward their weapons. The settlement residents were forming a protective circle around Astrid, and in the center of it all, the fox began to glow. Not subtly, not the faint shimmer Astrid had seen before. This was light like the sun pouring out of the small creature as if it could not be contained anymore. Everyone stopped, turned, stared. The fox looked at Astrid, and she heard a voice in her head. Not words, something deeper than words, more fundamental. It is time. No, she whispered. It is not midnight. It is not. The suppression does not care about human timekeeping, the fox voice said. It only cares that you are finally ready, that you are finally safe enough, surrounded by people who will fight for you, claimed by a mate who sees you as whole, ready to stop surviving and start living. Let go. The light intensified. Astrid felt something crack inside her. Not painfully, more like ice breaking in spring. Like something that had been frozen for so long it had forgotten it could melt. "Get her out of here," Kaelum shouted. "Get her somewhere safe." But it was too late. The aurora that had been building at the horizon all day suddenly exploded across the entire sky, green and silver in a gold that should not exist in nature. It poured through the windows of the hall, bathing everything in otherworldly light. And Astrid felt her wolf wake. It was not like she had imagined. There was no pain, no violence, just expansion. As if she had been living in a room too small her entire life and someone had suddenly removed all the walls. She could feel everything. Every pack bond in the settlement, every connection between every person. She could sense where they were strong and where they were damaged, where love flowed and where resentment festered. She could feel the territory itself, 67,000 square miles of mountains and forests and frozen rivers, all of it alive and aware, and welcoming her home like it had been waiting for her return. She could feel Kaelum's wolf, his feral madness, and she could see exactly what was wrong with it. Could see the curse like a black thread wound through his silver wolf, choking it, driving it toward insanity. And she knew with absolute certainty that she could fix it. She could feel Draven's wolf twisted by decades of greed and fear, and she could command it as easily as breathing. The power was immense, terrifying, absolutely hers. The fox dissolved into pure light and flowed into her, merging with her wolf, completing a circuit that had been broken for 300 years. When Astrid opened her eyes, they were silver white, the color of starlight on snow. "Draven Ashford," she said, and her voice carried a harmonic that had not been there before. The voice of guardian and wolf speaking as one. "Kneel." His wolf slammed him to his knees before he could resist. His eyes went wide with terror. Every wolf in the hall felt it. The authority that had been missing from the Northern Territories for 300 years. The balance that stabilized the Alpha King's power. The force that made the whole system work the way it was designed to work. Guardian had returned. Astrid walked toward Draven, and people parted before her like water. "You killed my mother," she said softly. "You hunted families for 3 centuries. You burned settlements and murdered children and built your fortune on stolen land. And you did it all because you were afraid of this." She gestured, and he could not look away. "You were afraid of someone who could see what you had become and command your wolf to stop you. Someone who could restore balance. Someone who could take back what you stole." She leaned down until her face was level with his. "You were right to be afraid," she whispered. Then she straightened and addressed the council members who were staring at her with expressions ranging from awe to terror. "I am Astrid Wintermere," she said, "guardian of the Northern Territories. Daughter of Kira Wintermere, who was murdered by this man 22 years ago, and I am claiming my birthright." The council leader found his voice. "You have demonstrated guardian abilities," he said shakily. "The council recognizes your claim. What would you have us do with Lord Ashford?" Astrid looked at the man kneeling before her, at the fear in his eyes, at the decades of cruelty written into every line of his face. She could kill him, one command, and his own wolf would tear him apart from the inside. But she had spent 6 years being the healer who showed up every day to help people who had never shown her respect. She had built a life she could be proud of. She was not going to become what he was. "Trial," she said, "public and thorough, with every piece of evidence Sarah has brought, every witness who wants to testify, every settlement he burned, every family he destroyed. Let it all be documented, let the truth be known, and let the council determine his fate based on actual justice, not fear or greed, or the desire for convenient solutions." She looked at Sarah, who was crying openly now. "You chose truth over family loyalty," Astrid said gently. "That takes a courage I cannot fully measure." "Thank you." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Astrid turned to Kaelum, who was watching her with those gray eyes full of wonder and something that looked very much like love. "Your wolf," she said softly. "The curse, I can see it, and I can fix it. If you will let me." "Please," he whispered. She placed her hand over his heart, and the power flowed out of her like water finding its level. She saw the black thread of the curse and gently, carefully dissolved it. Freed his wolf from the madness that had been choking it for 12 years. Kaelum gasped as the pressure that had been building in him for over a decade suddenly released. His wolf settled into perfect balance, no longer fighting for dominance, just existing in harmony with the human half as it was always meant to. "It is done," she said. He pulled her into his arms and she could feel his heart beating steady and strong and free. "Thank you," he breathed into her hair. "Thank you." The aurora was still dancing overhead. The hall was still full of people watching the impossible become real. And Astrid understood finally what the fox had been trying to tell her all along. She had never been broken. She had been waiting. Waiting to be safe enough and strong enough and surrounded by enough people who saw her worth to finally become what she had always been meant to be. Not despite being an Omega, not even because of her guardian blood, but because she was Astrid Wintermere, the healer who saved lives, the woman who taught herself sciences to help people, the person who turned rejection into purpose, who made herself essential through skill rather than birthright. And now the guardian who would restore balance to the north. She was all of those things, and all of those things were worth celebrating. The trial lasted 3 days. The council heard testimony from Pine Haven survivors, from settlement residents who remembered guardians from old stories their grandparents told, from financial experts who examined Draven's records and found $340 million in illegal holdings. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. The sentence was life imprisonment in the most remote facility in the Northern Territories, stripped of all titles, all land, all assets. Everything he had built on Guardian land returned to the territories. Everything he had stolen given back. It was not revenge, it was justice. And Astrid watched it happen with the same focused attention she brought to suturing wounds. Precise, thorough, making sure it was done right. Sarah stayed. She asked for a new position and Astrid gave her one. Territorial ambassador, or someone who could build bridges between the settlements and help ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. The Northern Territories began to change. Slowly at first, then faster. Laws protecting Omegas. Oversight on territorial finances. Independent councils that could check the power of individual lords. The measurable changes came quickly. Within 6 months, reports of Omega abuse dropped by 73% across the Northern Territories. Access to medical care increased by 340% as Astrid's healing network reached settlements that had gone generations without trained healers. The $340 million in seized assets from Draven's holdings funded schools, hospitals, and infrastructure that had been neglected for decades. Marcus, relieved of 22 years of guilt, spent his remaining years teaching young healers alongside Astrid, passing on not just medical knowledge, but the lesson that keeping silent about injustice was its own form of harm. Astrid expanded the healing network, trained apprentices, wrote to healers across all 7 territories, and began building a system where medical knowledge was shared instead of hoarded. And through it all, Kaelum stood beside her, not as her king, not as her superior, but as her partner, her equal, the man who had seen her when she was invisible and loved her for exactly who she was. They held the formal claiming ceremony 6 months later, in the spring when the first flowers appeared through the melting snow. Astrid wore Guardian blue. Kaelum wore Iron King gray. The aurora appeared in the daytime sky, impossible and beautiful. "What shall I call you?" he asked during the ceremony, his voice warm with affection and respect. "Healer, Guardian, Alpha Queen." "Call me Astrid," she said, "and know that I am all of those things, and that all of those things are exactly who I was meant to be." They kissed as the assembled territories cheered, and Astrid felt the foxlight swirl around their feet in blessing. She had spent 6 years being invisible, being less than, being the Omega who did not measure up to what everyone else thought she should be. And now she was the guardian who had returned, the healer who saved lives, the woman who had taught an Alpha King what it meant to be seen as human instead of as a crown. She was everything, and everything was enough. The white fox had followed her for miles, and now she understood why, because it had been leading her home to herself all along.